Said the topic today is God there even where there is ignorance? So on this humorous occasion, I would like to tell you a joke about the Pope. The Pope is a rather spiritual guy. Some people call him His Holiness, and some people believe he's the only one who can talk to God. So naturally, when he flew into New York to give a talk, they had to pick him up in a car, but you can't pick up the Pope in a taxi. They had to send a really fancy car. So they sent a limo. And as the Pope was riding around in this limo, he said, "Wow, I really like this limo. And I've never been to New York, and I've never driven before. Do you mind if I drive the limo?" And a rather unusual request, but if you're the driver, you can't really say no to His Holiness. So naturally, the Pope started driving around. And as I said, he's never driven in New York before and not a limo, so he gets pulled over. And the officer comes up to collect the license and registration. He sees who it is, and he goes right back to his car. And he calls up the chief, and he says, "Chief, I made a mistake. I pulled over someone really important." And the chief says, "Who was it? Was it the mayor?" And he says, "No, I don't think it was the mayor." And he says, "Was it the president?" And the officer says, "I don't think it was the president." And the chief says, "Well, who was it?" And the officer says, "Well, I don't know, but he's got the Pope as his driver." So back to the topic of, is God there where there is ignorance? Last week, Murley gave us a talk, and the subject of that talk was more or less, did God create the universe or become it? Something like that. And he told us a few creation stories. They were all a little bit different, but they basically had the gist that God, the universe was created of God. So God is everywhere. Not only did God create the universe essentially is God, and he's beyond the universe. So with that understanding, God's in everything, God is everything, we can answer today's question fairly simply in that, yes, everything that even looks ignorant or appears ignorant actually is God. God's in there. And our teachings say that every atom is imbued with uniqueness and divinity and the Christ consciousness. When we look around the world, it's pretty easy sometimes to remember this. If we're in a forest, some people feel that that's their spiritual activity is to walk in a forest. Other people look at the moon or the sun or the ocean and all the stars, and you think, wow, yeah, definitely God's out there. So Master gave us a prayer or an affirmation, God, God, God. And if everything's God and everything reminds us of God, it should be pretty easy to remember God, God, God. And yet we know that that's a rather difficult thing to remember, God, God, God. So what takes us away from this thought? You know, there's natural disasters, but the Bible talks about natural disasters, and it's very clear that they're always God's will. Floods, for example. There's also earthquakes and fires, and when these things happen, people ask, why, God? And we may even get mad at God. But even when we get mad or we ask why, that's because we understand that God's behind it. So if natural disasters don't make us forget about God, what is it? Well, tomorrow is the inauguration, and it's also Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The point is that I think it's really other people who can sometimes appear ignorant and make us forget about God. When we get caught off on the road, we're less likely to say, God, 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 and we're more likely to say, God, something else, you know? And the thing is, we get cut off on the road every day, especially driving around in Seattle. There's nothing more God forgetting. If a walk in the forest is God reminding, a ride down I-5 is sometimes God forgetting, I find. And that's not cutting you off on the road. Sometimes people don't mean to do that. It's certainly not the worst thing that a person can do. So why are other people so problematic? It's because people are responsible for what they do. of animals, Master says they're not responsible. It's up to God whether they live or die or become free, whatever they do. If they eat each other, they're not guilty of anything. But humans have to take responsibility for everything that we do. And unfortunately, we let ignorance live inside of us, and we give it agency, and sometimes we act from ignorance. And this is, when we see it in other people, it can be very upsetting. And so when someone commits a crime, sometimes we say, why, God? But we also often say, why did he do it? Because we understand that whoever committed the crime, that person is responsible. So we expect other people to behave themselves. And when they don't, we forget, and we have other thoughts. But, we can rather forgive ourselves when we slip, because there's several examples in this book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a sacred text to us, about our own masters, our own gurus, there are at least three stories in the autobiography in which our masters forget the presence of God because of the ignorance of another person. So this happens, and let me read you one story so that you know what I'm talking about. This story takes place at the Kumbh Mela, which is happening right now, by the way, really big one. Biggest one in 144 years, I believe, something like that. And so anyways, this story is from the point of view of Lahiri Mahashaya, who we call a yoga avatar, an incarnation of yoga, an incarnation of God. And he still makes a mistake. Let's see what happens. The scene was a Kumbh Mela at Allahabad, Lahiri Mahashaya told his disciples. I had gone there during a short vacation from my office duties. As I wandered amidst the throng of monks and sadhus who had come from great distances to attend the holy festival, I noticed an ash-smeared ascetic who was holding a begging bowl. The thought arose in my mind that the man was a hypocrite, wearing the outward symbols of renunciation without a corresponding inward grace. No sooner had I passed the ascetic than my astounded eye fell on Babaji. He was kneeling in front of a matted-haired anchorite. Guruji, I hastened to his side. Sir, what are you doing here? I am washing the feet of this renunciate, and then I shall clean his cooking utensils. Babaji smiled at me like a little child. I knew he was intimating that he wanted me to criticize no one, but to see the Lord as residing equally in all body temples, whether of superior or inferior men. The great Guru added, by serving wise and ignorant sadhus, I am learning the greatest of virtues, pleasing to God above all others, humility. That's a tremendous story, and I'm telling you that there's at least two other ones exactly like that, where one of our own gurus makes the mistake of criticizing someone and thinking that God isn't in them, or that they don't have God. And immediately, God comes down in the form of a guru, another guru, to correct them. It happens two other times. I won't read them all. But we just got a really huge spiritual lesson. I mean, the words of Babaji himself said that humility is the greatest virtue. We could and probably should, and there have been volumes written on the subject of humility in spiritual literature. But I'll give you one angle for why that might be important and relevant to this talk. It's because the human part of ourselves, our ego, notices other humans and their egos. In other words, it's the ignorance in us that sees the ignorance in you. And we have to be elevated so that the divine in us can see the divine in you. And I believe that that's roughly the meaning of namaste. The divine in me says hello to the divine in you. So we have to get to that level with the flawless vision, which was described in the reading, where Master saw his whole temple was radiating light. His whole body inside of him, it was all just light. We have to get there. The other part that Babaji made is that we have to treat ignorant people the same way. So we don't look at someone who's ignorant and think, oh, but they must be a pretty good guy, actually. That's not the point. There are, in fact, ignorant people out in this world, and we can't, it's not for us to redeem them or whatever. We just have to understand that God is in them. That's the only quality by which anything can truly be judged, is whether God is residing in there. And the answer is always yes. Of course, the thing is, if we had 3 cups in front of us, and one of them was filled with water, and one was filled with tea, and the other one was filled with some kind of sugary soda, we wouldn't be justified in saying, these are 3 cups of water. It's true that water is filling each of these cups, but they all have different qualities. And from a human perspective, which we have to deal with this world of Maya, we have to treat these cups differently. If someone asks for a cup of water, we can't give them a cup of soda and pretend like we did our job. So we have to be very practical in how we treat people, but always treating people based on what we know is the ultimate truth, that God is residing in them. And Martin Luther King said this: "In your life's blueprint must be a commitment to the eternal principles of beauty, love, and justice. Don't allow anybody to pull you so low as to make you hate them." So that's the outward lesson for this topic. But there's more. And that's the inner conflict with this. There's a personal struggle, and as devotees, we all meditate and get to know ourselves very well. And the body is like a temple, that was mentioned in the passage I just read you, and the altar is right here. It's our spiritual eye, and it's our concentration. And we have the ability to place God here, and that's the only thing that really deserves to be here. This is an altar, and it's for God. And if we put anything else up here, it would be rather wrong, right? And the same is true of our inner altar here. But when we meditate, we often find that we have some difficulty meditating. This altar that we've created inside ourselves, we use it to focus on other things. I was sitting there and meditating, and all I could think about was what I was going to say in 5 minutes. And other things come there, desires, different forms of restlessness. And sometimes when we have trouble meditating, we blame ourselves and we identify. The thing is, humans have actually developed perfect compassion. We think that we need to be more compassionate. In fact, we have perfect compassion. We are fully compassionate with this body. We believe that this body is us. Isn't that interesting if you think about it? Huh? And Swami said one time that Master, he wasn't just compassionate towards everyone, he was in everyone, because he was one with God, and God's in everyone. So when he saw a street, there's different, it's mentioned in this autobiography, the different cosmic consciousness experiences that Master has, and he sees himself in all the bodies and walking around. And in him, he sees himself in his soldiers. So I say we have perfect compassion. We're getting there. But we do have perfect compassion for this body. And the difficulty with that compassion is that we identify ourselves with our own faults, and we think that they are ours. But we have to develop the perfect vision that Master was talking about. And I'll tell you one more thing about how Master sees us. We have to learn to see ourselves the way Master sees us. And in his talks, you can hear from his own voice how much he loves his devotees. And it's very touching. So I'll read you one such passage. "I was watching you all last night. There was not one soul I could find that had the slightest little kink. So wonderful to see every soul when I look at their faces. I hardly talk to you, but I go through your souls. But your response, that brings that happiness in you and in me, is something that many, many families would love to have, even for a day. That is the way to live. Only by loving God do you learn how to love other people. Otherwise, you only love yourself. And as long as others don't do what you want, you get mad with them. Seek happiness in making others happy. Then everybody will make you happy." That's absolutely astounding. In this election, half the people have to win and half the people have to lose. And we're all convinced that the other side needs to be unhappy. Isn't that the case? As long as those people are happy, well, I can't be happy. Only half of us can be happy in this election. Yeah? That's how life goes sometimes. And the funny thing, it's rather infuriating, but Master said this: ignorance is everywhere 50-50. That's a hard pill to swallow. I think ignorance got to be at least 60-40 right now. I mean, well, so we have all good tendencies and bad tendencies. I just said that the inner body is like a temple. It's also like a battlefield. And I feel a little embarrassed to mention this with Murli sitting there, but in the Bhagavad Gita, we talk about the body as a battlefield called Kurukshetra. And there are the 5 good guys, basically. There's more than that, but there's 5 good guys called the Pandava brothers, and there's at least 100 bad guys called the Kauravas. The truth is there's way more than 100 bad guys. There's basically a countless number of bad guys. And there's really only 5 good guys. There's more than that. Each side has their own army, but the redeeming factor for the good guys is they've got Krishna on their side. And Krishna is like God. But the point is that I'm talking about is it's a given, right? Because the Kurukshetra is the body, and there are 2 sides, that means everybody has 2 sides inside of them. It's not anybody's fault, necessarily. We have our mental citizens. Some of them are good, and some of them are bad. And we don't have to identify with the bad tendencies. We're really not supposed to do that. And in fact, we're not even supposed to identify so much with our good tendencies, but that's don't think about that one too much, I don't think. So, let's see. When we identify with our bad tendencies, if we call ourselves sinners, there's no reason why we wouldn't just keep on sinning, right? If you are that, why wouldn't you continue? So we have to gain the way that Master sees us, which is to know that we have God inside of us, and then act from there. One of the most astounding things that Master said when I heard him say it is a recording of this. I think you can find it on YouTube. If not, we sell it downstairs in the boutique. He said, "Do not call yourselves sinners anymore. Sin belongs to the past. It is no longer yours. God is yours, and the masters are yours. Hold that in your bosom. Thrash that in every thought in yourself, and you will find that you dreamt that you were man and woke and found that you were God's reflection." So you see, inside we have a battlefield. And when it comes to our own ignorant tendencies, we have to be victorious. We have to be conquerors. We have to be like lions, and we have to say, God, God, God inside of ourselves. But when it comes to our brothers and sisters on this earth, we must be peaceful. We must celebrate our brotherhood. And if we choose victory over peace, we can't do that. We have to choose peace over victory. Because if we're victorious over our brothers, that means we lost the inner fight and we succumbed to the ideas of greed and hatred. So we cannot be a conqueror of other men. We have to be a conqueror of ourselves. And in that way, we can develop the flawless vision of the masters to see ourselves as we are. And in seeing ourselves as we are, we'll see God as God is and our brothers and sisters as they are. And that is the way to develop peace on earth. And Martin Luther King said this: "Let us keep going to the goal of selfhood, toward the realization of the dream of brotherhood, and toward the realization of the dream of understanding goodwill." That could almost be a quote from one of our own gurus, realization and brotherhood. Those were 2 topics that Master spoke about very often. And I'll close now with a reading from Whispers of Eternity. This is number 209. In the Temple of United Hearts. "It befits not thy lily-tender feet to dance on the stony soil of hard hearts. On the petals of my sympathy for others, may thy tenderness dance forever. Divine Mother, may I feel thy heart throbs in my own heart, thy joy in my happiness, thy wise direction in all my activity, thy spirit in my soul. Divine Mother, I lay all the flowers of my love at thy feet of eternity. Oh, open wide the flowers of my budding devotion, and release thy fragrance, that it may spread from my soul to the souls of others, ever whispering of thee. I pray to behold my love reflected in others. In the light of the greater love, may I behold thine unveiled face of perfect compassion. May I behold my true self in others, that I perceive thee ever enthroned in our united hearts. At the heart of my whispered prayers, I feel stirring thy silent whispers. In the light of my burning candle of devotion, I behold at last thy sacred blaze of perfect love. O divine Mother, unite our hearts as one heart, so that on the sacred altar of united hearts, we may find thine omnipresence enthroned forever.